Hi everyone, last class we talked about the marketing research process, so we had that bird's eye overview. Now we zoom in on the research proposal. Specifically in this class, you'll learn about the importance of properly defining a problem. We will also talk a little bit about the role of symptoms in problem definition, and then we move on to research objectives, action standards, and all these components together form a marketing research proposal. So how do you really define a problem in research? The key is making it as specific as possible. In problem definition, consider, for example, the following 3 questions. Which of the 3 proposed Instagram ads will generate the highest click-through rate to our page? What should be our marketing strategy for our sports apparel? And should we be in the sports apparel industry? So let's say, for example, a company like Lululemon is facing these research questions. What do you notice about these questions? What stands out to you? Is there any difference between the first question, the second, and the last one? The main thing you should notice here is that the first question is very specific. It asks specifically about 3 proposed Instagram ads and wonders specifically about which one is going to generate the highest click-through rate. The last question, on the other hand, is much more general, much more broad. It asks a much more existential question about should we even be in the sports apparel industry. Now, each of these 3 is possible in research, so each of these can be a potentially good research question as part of your problem definition, but it does determine what type of marketing research you will do later on. If you have a very specific research question, such as the first one, you will probably end up with very specific research methods, such as experimental design, where you're going to pre-test each of these 3 Instagram ads and then just see within a small test sample which one generates the highest click-through rate. Now, if you choose a much more broad question, or if the question you're facing is much more broad or general, it will also have implications for your research method. So you will go for a much more broad method, a much more exploratory type of research method, such as, for example, focus groups or preliminary secondary data analysis. So, long story short, how specific versus how broad your research question is will have implications for the type of research method you will choose. Now, how specific versus how broad your research question is also tells you something about the stage your business is in. A very specific question, such as the first one here, usually shows that the business is already in a much further stage. So they're basically already at a point of fine-tuning the 4 Ps, fine-tuning marketing strategy. A much more broad question, such as should we even be in the sports apparel industry, usually illustrates that the business is in its first stage. It's basically just still asking existential questions, still trying to figure out its place, and asking very broad questions as a result of that. So this timeline actually shows that usually businesses start with these very general, broad questions and then move on to more specific, narrow questions. Other examples of general questions could be, should we do paid Instagram ads or not at all? Should we be in the apparel industry? Should we launch this new product? And this usually means you will do some sort of exploratory testing. Whereas later on, if you ask specific questions, such as which of these 3 Instagram ads will generate the highest click-through rate to our page, or which of these 10 influencers should we sponsor, this usually leads to much more specific research methods such as advertising, pre-testing, focus groups, or experiments. Focus groups can actually occur both in the general questions as well as in the specific types of questions. Now, either way, when you are facing a question, it's always a good idea to go as specific as possible. So let's say you work at a concession stand in a stadium and you notice there's a downtrend in stadium revenue. There's also a downtrend in your concession stand revenue. You could just ask the broad question, how do we reverse the downtrend in stadium revenue? However, if you look a little more specific at what the underlying causes of this downtrend in stadium revenue, maybe based on ticket sales data, you could find that the problem is fan loyalty. Maybe there's just way less seasonal passes being sold, which is an indicator of a decrease in fan loyalty. So now you can ask your question much more specifically, how do we increase fan loyalty? Now, we can go even further, we can go even more specific. if based on this ticket sales data, you don't only know that there is a problem with fan loyalty, you also know that the problem of fan loyalty is most strong among 18 to 25-year-olds, because that's the group you sell least seasonal tickets to. So in this case, you can refine your question even more and ask, how do we increase fan loyalty among 18 to 25-year-olds? So going from broad to specific usually makes the question much more workable, much more easy to manage. I have a couple exercises here for you to get into that mindset of making a problem definition as specific as possible. Let's say, for example, for a research project, you're interested in understanding whether social media are harmful. Well, this is very broad. Like, which social media are we talking about? And how do you define harmful? Harmful to whom? Which target group do you want to study? And harmful in what sense, really? Harmful intellectually, harmful emotionally, physically harmful, affecting their sleep patterns. I mean, this is very broad. It encompasses a lot of different sub-questions. So my recommendation is to really do that mental exercise of trying to refine your research question to make it as specific as possible. And here's 2 suggestions, and you can come up with your own suggestions. They can be equally good. These are just examples on how to make this question more specific or more focused. For example, is there a relation between social media use and mental issues such as depression, FOMO, and loneliness? You could even go further, by the way, with this first question and define the type of social media used, such as, for example, specifically focusing on Facebook or Instagram. Another example could be, how can disclosing personal information on LinkedIn positively or negatively affect potential employers' evaluation of you as a job candidate? Another example in a different field would be, for example, what is the effect of global warming on the environment? This is a massive question. There is no easy answer to this. Scientists have been working on this for decades, and there's so many different aspects to global warming, so many different aspects to how it impacts the environment, that it's much better to just make it more specific and then tackle that one specific issue. For example, how does urban sprawl affect the occurrence of forest fires in California? Or how is deforestation of the Amazon forests for animal agriculture purposes decreasing biodiversity? So these would be 2 examples on how to refine this particular broad question. Now, I keep telling you to go as specific as possible, but on the other hand, if a quick Google search can answer a research question, it's probably too specific. So it's about finding that sweet spot where you still have some investigation to do, have some added value to create or a problem to solve, while still making it manageable. All right, now why does it really matter so much to properly define a problem? So the reality is, if you define a problem wrong, you're going to be doing irrelevant research. And this is going to lead to decisions that are not useful because you've been solving a problem that wasn't even there to begin with. So tackling the right problem that your business is facing or the problem that you want to solve is essential. And there's this epic historic case of Coca-Cola in the 1980s when they introduced new Coke. They took the original Coca-Cola off the market, and this resulted in an outcry from consumers. They started losing market share against Pepsi. But what very few people know is that the reason why they introduced new Coke and took the original Coke off the market is actually based on a wrong problem definition. Basically, what happened is Coca-Cola saw advertisement by Pepsi in which Pepsi used blind taste tests to illustrate that consumers in blind taste tests consistently choose Pepsi, which is sweeter, over Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola was like, holy schmack, Pepsi is totally beating us in taste tests. We should improve our recipe. We should change the taste. We should make it sweeter, make sure we can beat Pepsi in those taste tests. And basically that's how they come up with a new Coke, a sweeter version of Coke, trying to emulate Pepsi. However, this was a wrong problem definition. They shouldn't have been focusing on trying to beat Pepsi in taste tests. They should have just tried to focus on keeping their market share, safeguarding their market share, and sticking to the original nostalgic Coca-Cola, the original that people have been wanting. So let me show you the initial video here with the taste test. This is from Australia. So it's old, I warn you, but it's pretty funny and illustrative of the idea of how a wrong problem definition can set off a whole stream of research, wasting resources and time to actually end up with a wrong decision.
He says that he prefers the leading cola to Pepsi.
Right.
I want you to taste both colas, John, and tell me which taste you prefer.
This one.
Well, what do you know, Pepsi?
In taste tests across Australia, over 50% of people preferred the taste of Pepsi Cola over the leading cola.
I'm going to go for Pepsi. I'm sure.
Don't take our word for it. Let your taste decide.
So that was a notorious Pepsi campaign that led to this change in Coca-Cola's recipe. Now, when it comes to problem definition, ask yourself, how open-minded are you really? Are you thinking like a soldier or like a scout? Mindset is everything. So a soldier's job is to protect and to defend, right? A scout, on the other hand, seeks out new information. A scout explores and is driven by curiosity. Now, this is applied in daily life as well. How do we process new information? Do we process new information with an attitude of a soldier, trying to defend our existing ideas? Or do we approach new information like a scout, in which we actually welcome new information and constantly revise our own ideas as if they are hypotheses that need to be tested and retested just to come to better conclusions? So, the mindset of a scout is very helpful in research because it illustrates some sort of intellectual humility, where you really truly try to see a different perspective and add new, fresh data, new knowledge to revise your own ideas. This brings us to recognizing problems. Without an open mindset, it's very hard to detect problems. Usually, there's two main origins or sources of problems. First of all, there could be failures to meet an objective, which is the typical way we think of problems. For example, SDSU's objective was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to the 1990 levels by 2020, which was stated in the Climate Action Plan. That didn't happen. So where did we go wrong? How come we didn't meet that objective? Like, we set a certain goal for ourselves, a certain objective. How come we failed to meet that objective? This is usually how we think of problems. A second origin of problems would be an attempt to meet an opportunity. And we don't typically see opportunities as problems, but actually they are, because they do require decision making. They put you in a dilemma of like, hey, should we take advantage of this new development, this new scientific breakthrough or not? Is this worth pursuing or not? Is this business idea good enough to invest in or not? So all of these fall under the category of attempts to meet an opportunity. So either way, whether a problem stems from a failure to meet an objective or an attempt to meet an opportunity, you will have to look at information. You will have to collect information or data to solve that problem. And this all boils down to listening. Creative people find inspiration by looking at problems in the world around them. So they listen very carefully to what is happening around them and how they can solve certain needs and problems. Same goes, by the way, for failures to meet an objective. If you're not listening closely to the feedback of customers and employees, you don't know if you're actually meeting your objectives or not. So you want to look at the data to see if you're on track. One specific case, which is totally optional for you to look at, is Amazon's drone delivery system. So if you're interested in that specific case, feel free to take a look at this video here. In order to recognize problems, you need systems put in place to detect failures to meet an objective or to detect attempts to meet an opportunity. In case of failures to meet an objective, you need a control system. And a control system is an inward focus, an internal focus that looks at your company's data, sales data, reputational data, image analysis, and so on, to see whether you're on track. On the other hand, for attempts to meet an opportunity, you need an opportunity identification system, which is externally focused, so outward focused, and it constantly monitors opportunities. Think of, for example, trend watching. Either way, when trying to recognize a problem, there's two avenues that can be taken, both resulting in a situational analysis. On the left, you see situation A. On the right, you have situation B. On the left, in situation A, management already defines the problem to the best of their ability. So basically, they look at what's going on. They see, for example, sales data go down, and they try to define the problem. Then they bring external researchers on board. So let's say they hire a consulting company or a market research company to help identify the problem better. In that case, they send out invitations to bid and requests for proposals, and then they end up deciding which research company they will work with. Then, in the next step, the research company performs a situational analysis first. On the right side, situation B, you have researchers internally within the company already defining the problem and moving straight on to situational analysis. Now, what is a situational analysis really? It's basically background studies that are conducted both on the general industry as well as on the specific company or brand they are trying to consult. So general industry analysis would be looking at the key competitors in that industry, main market segments, growth in the industry overall, and so on. Whereas specific company focus or brand focus pertains to the company's history, key unique features, unique customers, and so on. So both the general industry as well as the company is being investigated before moving on to the actual market research. And this preliminary research is called situational analysis. Now, recognizing a problem is more difficult than you think, because often what we see is a symptom, not an actual problem. So let's say management notices that they're losing money, the company's losing money overall. They might mistakenly believe that's the problem, but that is not the actual problem, that's just a symptom. So make sure you never confuse symptoms and problems. The role of a symptom is only to alert management that there is a problem, but it doesn't actually identify the problem itself. General wisdom is that if you only treat a symptom, a superficial symptom, the problem itself will linger and may even get bigger. Let me illustrate this with an example. So let's say you work at a concession stand in a stadium and you notice that concession sales are going down. What could be potential causes of this decline in concession sales? Could be a wrong mix of food and drinks, bad quality of foods and drinks, maybe the prices are too high, maybe there's too long of a wait time, maybe there's local economic factors that have changed the circumstances, maybe there's an increase in food and beverage vendors outside of the stadium with appealing offers, maybe there's a pandemic and no one's coming to the stadium anymore. So there could be a variety of reasons leading to a downturn in concession sales. So what you can do as a researcher at first is do the elimination game. Start eliminating factors that cannot be the actual cause of this problem. For example, you look at industry norms and see if other concession stands have a similar mix of food and drinks, if they have similar prices, and so on. Look at local economic factors, see if there's a downturn in the economy, see if there's indeed a pandemic. So you can start eliminating based on those preliminary studies you do. This way you will be able to narrow down to a few specific causes of the problem. So let's say you wonder, okay, why are concession sales low? Could be because of long lines, just long wait lines. Now, why are there long lines? Well, that's because the wait time is long. Now, why is the wait time long? And you keep asking why. Turns out that it could be due to untrained concession staff, could be an inefficient cooking process, could be too much variety. So people spend too much time thinking about all their options before they choose. Could be related to credit card processing that is slow, and so on. So this technique where you keep asking why is called laddering. Laddering is a technique to drill down to identify one or more potential root problems or causes of the symptoms. This is essential in recognizing a problem in research. By consequence, what researchers see is very different from what decision makers see. Researchers look below the surface. They dig deep and try to find the true underlying business problems. What decision makers often see is only the obvious measurable symptoms, such as unhappy customers or decreased market share, low traffic or loss of sales. My goal is to train you into thinking as a researcher and look deeper. Drill down to understand what the real causes of problems are, and then tackle those root causes instead of tackling only the symptoms. Alrighty, you know everything there is to know about problem definition in research now. What's next? Next step is to set your research objectives. Once you have your problem properly defined, you need to identify what information you need to solve that problem. So a research objective is pretty much a to-do list. It's a goal you want to attain through research to solve that issue. And you can set your research objective in a very specific operational way by specifying from whom you want to collect information, what construct or constructs will be measured, such as, for example, sales, customer satisfaction, and so on. Those are all examples of constructs. And then also how you will measure each construct. So how will you go about collecting that data? Here's an example. Imagine there's too low customer interest in the plant power menu. So a resulting research question could be, which menu changes increase customer interest? Now, research objectives stemming from this research question could be the following. And by the way, at any point, if you want to pause the video and try to think for yourself, that'll be very helpful as you will be applying this as well this semester. But here's some potential research objectives. A first research objective could be establishing customers' current level of satisfaction with the menu. So you want to know the baseline. You want to know how happy they are with the current menu. Second, you want to determine which new menu items are appealing to customers. So you could find out what kind of new stuff they want to add to the menu. Third, you want to establish if there's any misconceptions or prejudice regarding plant-based fast food, because that could be an actual underlying cause of the issue too. So these are research objectives, very specific goals you want to attain in terms of research. Here's another example. Let's say Nissan is facing the dilemma on whether to introduce an electric car or not. A research objective tells them exactly what they want to do in research terms and how exactly they will go about doing that. So Nissan could say, our research objective is to gather information from a sample representative of the US population among those who are very likely to purchase an automobile within the next 6 months, to assess preferences measured on a scale from 1 to 5 for an electric Nissan model at 3 different price levels. So you can tell it's very nitty-gritty, it's very detailed already. So this is a good example of a research objective. Once Nissan actually has the information generated through this research objective, they can make a decision between these two decision alternatives, basically to launch or to not launch an electric car. The last component of a marketing research proposal is the action standard. And an action standard basically articulates what action will be taken with the information obtained. So how will we implement this information at the end? Let me give you an example. So building on that Nissan example, an action standard could be, such data would serve as input into a forecasting model that would forecast unit sales by geographic regions of the country for each of the 3 different price levels. So that is specifically saying what you should do with that information. This is your action standard. And this sums it up. The marketing research proposal consists of the following main elements. First of all, statement of your problem and research questions. Second, specification of your research objectives. Third, a brief proposition of the research method that you plan to use to accomplish your research objectives. So, for example, saying, through survey research, we plan to blah, blah, blah. Fourth, there is an action standard. And then lastly, which I hadn't mentioned yet, but is usually part of it as well, are budget estimates and a timetable. So this makes up a marketing research proposal.